My name is Angelina Avedano, and this is InterSpace, where we explore the spaces between us. Join me for discussions on a series of realities with thinkers, writers, thought leaders, and artists. Thom Carr has been practicing yoga since 1974 and has been teaching since 1986. He completed instruction in several Raja Yoga traditions, including Transcendental Meditation, Kriya Yoga, and Ananda Yoga. Thom is also a Jo-Ray practitioner, Reiki master, and teacher, and has a bachelor's degree in psychology. He continues to study various traditions of yoga, spiritual traditions, and energy work. Thom currently works with his most dedicated students, coupling Western and Eastern modalities into his lessons. Please welcome Thom Carr. As we were putting together this podcast, I really wanted to bring Thom Carr back to address the specific events that were unfolding this week, the week of April 20th, 2021. He graciously agreed, and he came back to offer some practical ways we can manage extreme emotions. I hope you enjoy our extended conversation. Hi, Thom. Welcome back to InterSpace. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about emotions. We are heading into right around a year since the pandemic really kicked in, and a lot of other social issues. We're coming up on just this year mark, and I wanted to talk about all the emotions that people have been feeling and the extreme emotions and maybe the root cause of some of these emotional outbursts. I've talked to several people this week who've been feeling out of sorts, a lot of anxiety. Some people are incredibly depressed, and I know we can't point to one single thing that is the cause of everyone's problems, but I do think that we can speak to how do we, manage these overwhelming emotions.
Well, I think we can not point to one single thing in the outside world for people's emotions, but I think we can point to a single thing inside for people's emotions. And that, I think, is the crux of the matter, which is that we are kind of creating the situation that we're in because of the fact that we are accustomed to live a certain way, and because we have certain standards that we've imposed on ourselves for conditions under which we can be happy or not happy. Then those self-created standards have created a situation where if those things are not met, then we're not happy. If they are there, we are happy. It's something that we've decided inside based on our likes, our dislikes, which are based on essentially whether it's pleasurable or not. And we can then expand that definition of what's pleasurable and what's painful into all kinds of different areas. So for a lot of people, it's painful not to be doing what they were doing before the pandemic. They were used to a certain lifestyle, and suddenly, and quite suddenly, they're thrust into a different one with different standards, different things we have to do that are told to us to be safe. And there's rebellion on the part of some people saying, I'm not doing it because I don't want to. And that's really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. My ego is not happy. My personality is not happy with being told that I have to do these things. Whether it's a real thing in the outside world or not, my personality is not happy with it.
Yeah.
And so this kind of self-created reality that we've imposed on ourselves is what's creating the anxiety or the depression. It's not something in the outside world. That sounds crazy to most people. That sounds like, well, before this happened, I did not feel this way. And if I didn't feel this way before, and I feel this way now that it's happened, it's got to be the thing that happened that's caused me to feel this way. No, it's your reaction to the thing that happened that's making you feel that way. Some people are not feeling that way, but they're in the same situation. So why would that be? If the situation is the thing that prompted the response, then everybody should feel the same way. And we don't. Everybody doesn't feel the same way at any time about anything. So we're talking about individualized reactions based on our past programming to what's going on. If we're aware that we are prompting our reactions, then we can change those reactions. We cannot do it from the level that the reactions are happening from. In other words, our egos can't change the way our egos feel. It has to be more honest and more deeply constructed inside in order to be able to accomplish that. And that's not something that happens overnight.
You know, you said something earlier about rebellion, and it just makes me think about, you know, there was a time when I was working with some children in school who were, quote unquote, diagnosed as oppositional defiant, with oppositional defiant disorder. And that, you know, and I did some reading about that, and I looked into it, and I started to think, isn't this what everyone is? Isn't everyone oppositional defiant? Because I gotta say, when someone, it almost goes without saying that when someone tells you you have to do something, you want to rebel against it.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that kind of thing usually comes into play the more the ego is forming. You know, the more you have a sense of yourself as separate from everyone else and everything else, the more you have your own points of view and want to impose those points of view on those around you and those things around you. And so that whole ODD, that odd thing, starts coming in and producing a situation that's pretty unpleasant for the person that's actually generating that behavior as well as everyone around them. It's obviously not a solution, but it's the way that with the ego's more contracted awareness, it's the way that seems to be the path to accomplish what you want, because you just kind of don't know any other way. And the result is that it doesn't work any more than being, you know, anxious and depressed and so on in the situation does anything for anybody. It doesn't help, but it's how our egos respond because we don't know any other way of responding.
Mm-hmm.
We're presented with a stimulus, and our response is based on our programming.
Mm-hmm. Well, I even when you're aware of your emotions, I think, you know, for me this week in particular, I had just a day where I couldn't explain it. I didn't really feel particularly functional or like I wanted to engage with people. There was no reason. There was no reason for it.
Yeah.
But what I decided to do was just say, okay, that's how I'm feeling today. So I'm not going to try to engage with people if I can avoid it. I'm going to just stay in, and not that we don't stay in all the time now anyway, but you know, I was just going to just be with that. And like, it's okay. Instead of trying to figure out why. Usually I think in the past I would call you up and go, I don't know why I feel this way. I just feel I don't like feeling this way, and I want to make it stop.
Right.
So let's find the solution.
Yeah. And the solution does not lie in our trying to make it stop. The desire is for it to go away, and that's a good thing because who wants to suffer? But the way we make it go away is not trying to solve that problem from the ego level where it's being generated. Since we're caught in the middle of the problem, how can we see what's going on clearly enough to be able to know the right path to change it? You know, that's the purpose of counseling. Someone on the outside that can see what's going on is not embroiled in it. But we can do it ourselves over a period of time too. But we have to do that by stepping outside of our egos and coming to know ourselves, coming to know that, okay, this is what I do under these circumstances. I always act this way. And if we are aware first that we are the ones that are acting that way, we are the ones that are reacting that way, and we're usually basing our whole behavior on the reaction rather than any proactivity that we could take in terms of the situation. So we're just kind of knee-jerk reacting, and we base all of our behaviors around that. Oh, it's unpleasant. I want to get rid of it. What can I do? Push it out of the way, run away from it, do the typical things that nature has programmed into us in order to survive. When you feel fear, the stimulus that produces the fear is the thing you want to avoid. So you run away from it. Otherwise, you're threatened. Your life could be threatened. You could be killed or you get hurt or whatever it might be. So you run away. And the whole fight or flight or freeze, natural response. You fight if you're backed into the corner. You can't run away. So you have to defend yourself so that you can make sure you'll keep on going. So these feelings of fear or anger get morphed into more prolonged symptoms, like fear becoming anxiety that just keeps on happening over and over and over again because you can't find the solution to it. No, you can't on the level of the ego. On the level of the problem, it can't be solved. You have to step outside of it. So the solution, I think, first step is acceptance. Accept that this is how you feel, which is what you said you did. You just accept it because it's true. That's what's going on. Let's first be honest. And the second part sounds crazy, but don't try to change how you feel. You can't accept it if you try to change it, because then it's your ego manipulating things to try to push it away or distract yourself or whatever your coping strategy might be for that particular thing. If you don't do that, and then you're fully aware of how you feel as a result, then you can do something with it. One of the interesting things is the more you allow these things to express themselves, the less they express themselves.
Okay, Tom, but I think a lot of people, and myself included in the past, acceptance is kind of a tricky word because it feels almost like that you're just sort of complacent with these negative emotions and you just sort of given up.
Yeah, I don't think you can be complacent with it. If you're not comfortable, I don't think you're going to be complacent. I think it's more of a level of honesty than complacency. If you're fully honest with yourself, then you're fully aware of what's going on. And when you're more aware, and you can't be more aware unless you're more honest, because otherwise you're hiding it from yourself. If you're hiding it, you're not aware. Okay? You may be aware of the symptom and so on, but the deeper awareness will be kind of cut off because you don't want to do that. You don't want to face it. And of course, no one does. That's true of everybody. No one wants to face it because the fear is built into us to run away from it, not turn around and face it. So the whole situation then is to do the opposite of what we're programmed to do. Okay? First, you feel the fear, and then you allow the fear to be there without trying to get rid of it. And then it will exhaust itself. You're not going to be running away in great fear and terror for the rest of your life. Your system can't handle that level of stimulation that long. So you'll get tired. You'll stop. It will stop. If you built up the energy to a huge extent, then what's going to happen is it's going to keep coming back over and over and over and over again. It's a process. We can't think of this as being, I will do this once, and it didn't work. Well, of course not. You have to keep doing this because how long were you running away from it? How long did you reinforce that behavior? Probably a long time. You think it's going to go away overnight? No. But it will start going away if you allow it to express itself and you don't try to interfere with it. Being aware that you have generated the fear for this. If it's something that is really life-threatening, then yeah, you should run away from it. But usually, if it's anxiety that goes on and on and on, it's not anything life-threatening. Okay, nature built into us to keep the body going. Fear, run away from the thing that threatens you. But then we associate various things with that fear, and those things are not threatening. So our ego has manufactured a threat when there is none. And and fear is very contagious. I mean, it will just spread out very quickly, pretty spontaneously too, because of the fact that if one thing resembles the fearful thing or the threat, you should run away from that too, because it may be a threat. And when something else resembles that thing, and on and on and on it goes, you end up with this chain where lots of times people's lives are just totally taken over by fear. They can't function. They're really paralyzed because everything will produce some form of fear. Totally irrational, completely irrational. So trying to deal with it on a rational level will not work. What you need to do is deal with it on its own level. So thinking about it and rationalizing and saying, oh, this is stupid and I shouldn't feel this way and all of that is not going to do anything. If you realize that, it's ridiculous what you're afraid of, that can help, but it may not stop the reaction. Okay? It's by having the awareness that you're not threatened by this and still allowing the reaction to happen. Because then you can manage the reaction more the more you experience it for what it is.
So what would you say to someone who might, counter this and say, look, when you turn this around on me like this, it's like blaming the victim. You're telling me that the trauma and the things that I've experienced in my life, that's my fault.
Yeah. Well, if we're blaming ourselves, and that's the wrong approach. That's the same thing as, that's projection, essentially, internalized projection. Put the blame somewhere, which is what blame does, and essentially saying it's my fault then for everything, and internalizing all of that, which can produce guilt or can produce all kinds of other things in terms of how we feel about ourselves. It diminishes the way we feel about ourselves. That's not helpful either. Blame is never helpful. Blaming ourselves, blaming someone else, blaming a circumstance does not help anything at all. To think that, okay, this particular situation with the pandemic is a thing that is here because there's a disease out there and it's creating a bad situation for me. Well, there's a disease out there. If you get sick, it could be a bad situation for you. If you don't get sick, isn't that some sort of victory? Why are we complaining about not being sick? Instead, we're looking at it from a very ego-centered point of view of, well, I can't do what I used to do. And that's terrible. Okay. So I'll put the blame out there on the pandemic, on the government, on the medical system or whatever, instead of, well, how do I approach it myself? How can I make it better for myself? Not blame. Helps nothing. Honesty, acceptance will help. First of all, we do have a pandemic. You have to accept that. No matter how much you may not want to, it's there. Accept it. Then accept this is my reaction to it. Well, if this is my reaction to it, how can I act proactively to change that situation? But I don't know what route to take at all if I'm not aware of how I'm feeling and what things are triggering off those feelings. I feel bad because I feel bad. Is it my fault? No, it's my programming. The programming comes from nature, not me. Blaming nature is stupid because nature's keeping us alive with that programming. So the blaming just doesn't work. Acceptance and honesty. And that's not easy for a lot of people, or at least say some people, to be like brutally honest with yourself and say, whoa, okay, I'm creating this situation because of whatever it might be. We can make all these things in terms of our own faults and things of that nature. But that's universal. We don't have to look at it as a fault. We just look at it as, this is the programming I have now, based on my past experience, based on my genetics, my upbringing, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is what's happening. What do I do about it? I created it. I can uncreate it.
Well, I think when we get into this conversation, it seems like you and I always sort of kind of move in and out of this space of, so how do we take responsibility and own our own emotions and our feelings and our responses to what's happening in the world, and also hold an equal space that says, yeah, there are systemic problems. Yeah, the medical system is a problem. I mean, it's not to say that all these outside things are to blame for the way that I'm feeling, but we can't close our eyes to the fact that there are major systemic problems in our political system, in our, economic system, in the medical system that we have to address. And so how do you hold both of those?
By distinguishing how you feel from the event that's happening. Okay, there's an event. Yeah, okay, this is not good. If you lived in Nazi Germany, there's lots of events that were really bad. Okay, how would you react to that? Well, who's going to react to, oh, I shouldn't feel this way? If something is unfair or wrong that's going on in our eyes, we're not going to be happy with it. If it goes on and everyone feels essentially the same way while it's going on, then a collective will not feel happy about it. Okay? We can do something to change it, then we do something to change it. We just realize our reactions. We're not in a better place to change things if we're really upset, anxious, filled with fear, depression, anger, whatever it might be. That's going to not only color the way we perceive things, it's going to direct the way we react to them. And that's not going to be helpful. So if we're clearer, we can remedy the situation better. We can address the issues with a clearer mind than we can with an ego-centered mind.
Do you think that there's a common thread or a common root to all of these emotions, to the depression, the despair, anxiety, fear, rage, outrage? Do you think, though, that I've been wondering lately if there isn't a common sense of what I would say is loss that is underneath all of it, or this has just been coming to me lately, and I'm not sure if I'm misperceiving that, but underneath everything, it just feels like there's a sense of a loss of the way things used to be, a loss of the way I see myself in the world, a loss of the way that I believe the world should work. But underneath everything, it seems to be a loss of something.
Yeah. Well, that's very common in life. Since things change all the time, they're constantly in the process of changing. At some point, that thing that's presented to our senses will change. Okay, it's changing right now, but it will change it, get to the point where we'll be able to see or experience that change on a surface level. So built into the nature of manifestation in life is loss. It's transforming into something else. And I think that's the purpose of loss, transformation. If we can take it not from an attachment level where our personalities want it to be a certain way, and it's not that way anymore, and therefore this situation is terrible and awful, well, some things you're going to feel that way about, obviously. If it's something that's like a big loss in your mind, then you're going to feel that way. But realize that it's also the process of transformation, that everything that goes is becoming something else. at the same time. That's why it's going. Okay, so if we're looking at it from a wider perspective, that is not from the level of attachment to particular things on the part of our personalities and egos, then we're going to see it as something quite different. In order to grow internally and to transform, it's a loss of our egos. We have to experience that loss. And deep inside, when you start experiencing it, it is not fun. It's very difficult because our ego attachments are extremely strong. If we're defining ourselves as our egos, personalities, and bodies, and those things are changing or are threatened in certain ways, it's very disconcerting, to say the least. In mysticism, in Christian mysticism at least, they call it the dark night of the soul, which is St. John of the Cross, I think, was the one that came up with that. I'm not totally sure, but what he was saying is that you reach a point in the growth process, or just in life in general, where you're faced with losing the most important things to you. And it will happen to everyone. If you don't lose a person, people, or things around you in your lifetime, you will lose yourself in death. It's going to happen, period, and usually happens over and over again in any given lifetime. And I think the whole point is to let go. To let go. The answer, obviously, is not to hold on. Hold on produces suffering. The more you hold on to things, the more hopeless it gets, because those things are going to change. And you're going to end up suffering. The more you let go, the more you won't. Doesn't mean you won't feel sorrow, you won't get upset, you won't go through tough times. We all do. But if you have a perspective on it, it changes it. And the wider that perspective is, the more, ego transcending that perspective is, the less you suffer. The more you see it in context. We can look at a small picture and think this is the way it is, but step back, and it makes more sense. You can wander around a town and not know where you're going from street to street, or climb a mountain that's next to the town, see the whole layout of the town, and know what streets to walk on to get to where you're getting to. We're bumping into the street lights, I don't know, as we're walking around the town. We're not seeing the bigger picture, so of course we're suffering. We don't know how to get to where we want to get to.
Well, and is there a place to get to?
Yeah, a larger perspective. That's the thing that will at least relieve some of the suffering. In my experience, it relieves more than some of the suffering. And the result is you can live life more fully. You can be freer. You can get $1 million and think, suppose I lose it somehow, and be anxious about that. You can have much more than what anyone else has, but still lead a miserable life because you're too attached to it. If that thing is so important to you, your ego is going to attach itself to it automatically. That's what will happen. And if you know that, then you're prepared for it. But if you don't know it, you're just going to end up suffering more and more and more. I think we have to, distinguish between attachment and bonding. We can be bonded to someone or something at a deeper level and know that those things will change and be willing to allow them to change, but still keep that bond. And that's at a deeper level. That's not really at an ego level, because it transcends the change.
Well, I can see that there's a little bit of a tension there where it feels as if it's letting go could be perceived as abandonment.
Only by the ego. If you have a larger perspective, you're including much more than what the ego would include. So we can think of ego awareness as contracting, as tunnel vision. Okay, then we're only seeing what's right in front of us. We can think of the expanded perception as opening up that tunnel and stepping back more and more steps as you grow till you see more and more of the context of what you were originally looking at. What you were originally looking at is still there as you saw it before, but now it's in a much broader context. And that context changes the way you perceive and understand that original perception. So if we hold on, abandonment is how you feel if you're forced to let go of something you didn't want to. Okay, oh my God, this is awful, you know. If you do it with abandon, then that's a different deal. It's how we can take these same things that are built into us and transform them into something more greater, taking in more of life with more awareness. For example, you mentioned depression. Depression essentially is a giving up. Okay, I'm in a situation I really don't like. This is awful. This is terrible. I tried this and this and this and this and all my strategies. Nothing works. I give up. Everything's terrible. So depression is essentially kind of an unrelieved sadness. Everything is terrible. This is awful. Life is miserable. And, you know, other people can go through the same situation and not end up depressed. So obviously the person generated the depression themselves. Why? Because they were so attached to whatever situation, person, you know, fill in the blank, that when they lost it or thought they lost it or in the process of losing it, everything falls apart in their minds. Their life is shattered because that thing or series of things, maybe, whatever it might be, that it's gone or is going. There's a loss there that produces depression. The natural response to loss is grief. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how we feel. That's our ego going through the process of letting go. Because in the end, we have to do that. If we lose something permanently, we have to let go. There is no choice. We can let go from the ego point of view and become depressed, or we can let go from an expansive point of view and become transformed. And it's kind of like an either or on the level of ego, but it can be both and from a more transcendent point of view, in that we go through it, but we end up transformed.
So is what you're saying about depression what you believe is that it is in all cases, or are there situations in which a person is clinically depressed and it is really beyond their capacity to manage or to address it?
Yeah, well, every situation obviously is different. Every person is different. But I think when we're just on that level of attachment and ego, we can't manage it. We can't do anything with it. All we're going to feel is the loss, the grief, and the sadness. All we're going to feel is the hopelessness. But if we look at it from the level of what's beyond the ego, beyond our sense of being separate from everyone and everything else, then it becomes something different. Then it's no longer everything is terrible. It's that everything is in motion. Everything is changing. And this is what's going on here. This situation is changing. Well, it was always changing. It just didn't come into our direct perception until it reached a certain critical point. If we're aware, no matter what, our own personalities, our own thoughts, emotions, everything is always in the process of changing, then we realize this is part of that process. If we're hopelessly, quite literally hopelessly attached to it, then we become hopeless. Then we become depressed. But it's that same mechanism. If we approach it from a more expanded point of view, then we let go. We can't grow unless we let go. Well, there's a slogan for you. We really can't. Because in order to embrace something new, we have to let go of the old. We have to let go. Giving up is also letting go, but it's letting go on the level of ego, on the level of negativity, on the level of a contracted awareness based on attachment. Okay, so we can use that same mechanism of letting go that we did in depression to let go from a more expansive point of view and transform, because it's the same stimulus taken from a different perspective, a perspective that's not attached to one contracted, narrow understanding of what the situation is, or really of who we really are.
I've heard depression described as kind of a lack of feeling anything at all.
It can be. You can be numb.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really even have to be depressed to not feel.
Mm-hmm.
You can just be numb. And I guess we've gone through that emotionally sometimes, every one of us at some point to one degree or another.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of shut ourselves off. It's like if we feel so much physical pain, the brain will kind of shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do this anymore. And we can do that emotionally as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just not, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm shutting it off, And if that's temporary, okay, that's fine. It allows us to cope better. But, it's not easy to accept where you're at in this kind of situation and to directly feel what you're feeling without trying to get out of it. If you get to a certain point where you can't take it, well, you don't torture yourself. That's crazy. That won't do you any good at all. So what you do simply is feel to the extent that you can feel it. Okay? Be as comfortable as you can be with it. And I know that it's probably not the best word to use in a situation like that. But if you can handle it the way it is right now without trying to change it, then that's good. Allow that aspect of yourself that's very unhappy or anxious or angry or whatever to express itself without hurting yourself or someone else or hurting the environment. Just let it express itself. You're releasing the energy that's involved there, and it's easier to handle as a result. If you need to, you relax as best you can. Can't handle it? Stop, take some deep breaths. Identify where you feel the sensation in the body, because you can't feel a sensation unless it's a physical sensation. You usually feel it in the abdomen, chest, or neck if it's stress. You usually don't feel stress in your finger. So, you just pay attention to where that stress is and breathe into it. Take a deep breath and feel as if the air is going right there, the energy is going there. Exhale and be aware of how the body relaxes when you exhale, because it does every time you exhale. Just put that sensation on where you feel, wherever the tension is or the anxiety, anger, whatever it is in the body. Okay, I feel it in the abdomen. Breathe into the abdomen, just in your mind. Exhale. Feel the abdomen relax when you exhale. Blow out the tension. Let it go. It's a way of dealing with it directly, regardless of what the issue is that's causing it. The issue that's causing it, well, you talk with a counselor about that. You talk with someone who's objective, who's trained and can understand where you're at and direct you out of where you're at. But the way you can handle it on your own until you do that is simply to deal with it physically. Deal with what the body is doing, because that's what you're feeling. And you can help neutralize that feeling by introducing the opposite element to that feeling. So if it's tension and fear, you need to relax. You say, well, I can't relax. Well, of course not. You're full of fear and tension. Start the process. Again, it's not something, I tried it once or twice, it didn't work. It doesn't go that way. You have to keep applying it. It's kind of like we have a base level of anxiety. And if we lower that base to more and more relaxed states, then when we get anxious, we don't get as anxious as we did before, because we're not starting from the same platform that we did before. the foundation is changed. We're more relaxed on a more permanent level. So you would do a relaxation all the time, any day, anytime you want to. It's not necessarily when you feel anxious. Get more and more relaxed. Your mind is clearer, there's less stress on the body, and you can handle things better. And as a result, you can accept it more, and you can not try to change it more. So the way to change it is to breathe like that. Okay. One way, if there's a lot of anger, you need to what? Well, they say cool off. Well, cool your breath down. Just you make like an ooh shape with your lips and inhale through your mouth and exhale through your nose. And you'll feel the cool air. Pay attention to that cool air, not the thing that's causing the anger. And when the situation comes up, the stimulus for that anger comes up, go back to doing the breath thing. If you're depressed, you don't want to move. You don't want to do anything. So you can breathe more rapidly. Not so you'd get hyperventilated or something, but just breathe more rapidly. You can, emphasize the exhalation again. Push the air out, breathe in, push the air out, and do it more rapidly through your nose. You can use the diaphragm muscle, which will really help in getting that energy moving inside. And that's what you want because your system is slowed down from the depression. So you can calm down, cool off, or energize simply by using your breath. And every time you feel this way, instead of thinking about how terrible it is, or how frightening it is, or how much it really gets to you and gets your anger going, what you can do is just adopt any one of those 3 breathing methods and see what happens. It's not going to hurt.
Mm-hmm. It sounds so easy, and when you say it like that, it sounds so, it sounds like it's going to be so simple to just say, feel your feelings and let them go. But I think we have to talk about how invested and how hard it is to come to terms with how invested we are in maintaining our own suffering.
Yeah, we really are. The ego is, because the ego essentially is afraid of the unknown, again, based on that whole self-preservation principle. We're afraid of what we don't know. And changing, transforming, going along with life events is spooky because of that. We're not secure anymore. We're always after our security. Make sure we're safe, secure, and okay. And we can never really do that on the surface level of life because it's always changing. There's always some unexpected event that can occur that will short circuit that whole feeling of security. If you feel more secure in yourself, period, again, by seeing things in a larger context, you can go through some pretty jarring events smoothly or more smoothly. But facing these things on the part of the average person, and we're all average people, is not an easy thing to do. It's not so simple, here we go, nothing to it. Yeah, the methods are simple, the path is simple, but walking it is not so easy because we have these attachments, we have these fears, and we have like our psychological claws in certain things, and it's very difficult to pry them out. Don't try to pry them out. It's just going to cause more tension and more fear, more anxiety. You simply have to go with what is the case. Be aware of what is the case. Change the context of what you're experiencing, and that begins to change the situation. And note that it begins to change the situation. It's not going to happen overnight. And as the process unfolds, other things may be needed to practice in order to address whatever is coming up then. So I think if we address it on a physiological level first, it's the simplest and most direct way. As I said, if you want to talk about issues and things, then a counselor is a good route to take, one that really understands you and is open to ways of having you cope with and deal with your problems so that you can function better. But we can do something in the meantime. We can speed it up. We can make it better and easier for ourselves. We just don't. I talk about doing this, a lot of people, then they'll say they went through a difficult period. I'll say, well, did you try this? And they'll go, oh, no, I forgot. It just doesn't even occur to us, you know? Our egos are so invested in the situation and how terrible it is, you know, that's all that's on our minds. The ways of addressing how we feel are not. So simply by adding that element in, that awareness of how we feel, let it express itself and how to deal with it when it does, changes the character of it. Because then we're no longer blaming the situation, the person, whatever it might be. We're looking at ourselves right away. You're paying attention to, this is my reaction to it. And my reaction is what's causing me to experience the situation the way I experience it.
You know, we've talked about depression, and we've talked a little bit about anxiety, but I want to talk about some of these other extreme emotions like fear and maybe even that inability to, I don't know exactly what I would call it. I guess it's partly anxiety, but just the inability to settle down and to be present with ourselves because it's just too overwhelming. That, you know, that feeling of wanting to run or of wanting to suppress or wanting to hide is almost, it's really difficult to be in your own skin at that point.
Yeah, it is. And that's why you probably need to address what's going on physically in order to be able to be in your own skin for a while. When I was learning relaxation methods, I was told, you know, you will relax to a certain point when maybe some unconscious fears and things will come up. If you get up to get away from it, the fear wins. If you stay with it and address it and relax all the more, you win. Okay, so it's that sort of thing that we can control it. It may feel like we can't. And by control, I don't mean, you know, dominating it and manipulating it.
What do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean?
I mean allowing it to be.
Mm.
Because that's what we have to do. We all have fears. We all have tension. We all have anger. How do you deal with it? What do? Do you let it run things, or do you allow yourself to run things while having those feelings? It's the fact that because nature built in that fear response, run away from the threat, that we run away from things that are not threatening. It doesn't solve the problem because it's not actually a threat. And if it's not a threat, why are we running away? Because this is how we perceive it based on our past programming, our past experiences, especially when we're very young, we don't know any better. This is how it is. This thing causes pain. I'm going to avoid it. So, you know, a candle, say you stuck your finger in the candle flame when you were 2 years old, you know, it caused fear every time you see a candle. This is very simplified, of course, but just the principle involved, that every time you see a candle, you'll run away from it. Every time you see a match, because it looks like a candle, you'll run away from it. Every time you see a light that color, you'll run, and on and on and on. You can just completely expand that based on unconscious associations with the original stimulus. If we let that take over, we're pretty much paralyzed. If we realize what we're doing, then we can be in charge. But by being in charge, I mean allow ourselves first to accept where we're at and to understand where we're coming from.
I think it's such a paradox to try to understand what you mean by you're not going to try to change anything.
Right. And it does sound weird. It sounds crazy. It's like, okay, I'm going to change by not changing anything. You know, that doesn't make any sense at all. And on the surface of it, you know, those words don't. But we're not talking about rationality, for one thing. We're talking about fear. And we're talking about irrational fear. You have to deal with irrational fear on the level of the fear, not on the level of rationality. Okay? And when you're able to be aware of what's happening to you, then you're dealing with it on a level that transcends the fear. That's when it starts to diminish. So in other words, we don't know we have fear of a light that's the same color of a candle flame. We just tend to avoid it. And then we're, say, in a situation where we have to be in a room with just one light going where that's the same color as a candle flame. Now we can run out of the room, and that will take care of the stimulus and you won't feel the fear anymore. Or you can stay in the room, feel the fear, and realize that light is not a threat. Okay? When you do that and stay with it, then you can handle seeing that light without fear eventually. What you've done then, instead of just removing the stimulus for the fear, you've transformed yourself to be able to handle that situation.
So do you think there's any way to... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Did you want to finish that thought?
I was just going to say, but you didn't do it on the level of forcing yourself. Did it by allowing yourself to feel what you felt and being aware that actually there was no threat involved at all.
So I'm just wondering if there's a way then that we somehow apply these principles for individuals and on the individual level as we're working internally to the collective experience of these broader fears, anxieties, depression that we see happening socially. And when we are looking at very real triggers, very real threats, very real fears that are based in a lot of social traumas. And what does that look like?
It's possible that there is a collective level where these things can transform. But I think it has to at least start with the individual being aware of their own responsibility, not blaming themselves, but their own responsibility, as one of my high school teachers once phrased it, that we have the ability to respond in specific ways. We can change those ways. That if we're anxious, fearful, and so on, we can do something about it. We created the situation unconsciously. We didn't mean to do it, so we can't blame ourselves. We didn't mean to make that happen. It's happened to all of us, everybody. So we're all in that same boat. We've all created a narrow kind of egoized version of life for ourselves. I can't talk about someone else's memories in terms of fully understanding them. I can read about someone's experiences in a book or have someone tell me, but I did not experience those things the way they did. I can only talk about my own ego's experiences. So if we realize that all of these experiences that I've had, the way I react to things is not the way other people may react to them, then what's the difference here? The difference is me and what I've done, what my experiences were that have created and built up the personality that I have, that's still going on. So it's all me. The whole thing is me. This whole experience of life in the waking state, in the apparent outside world, is me. It's all going on in my nervous system, through my senses, in my brain. I can do something about that because it's me. I can't talk about changing someone else unless they decide to change. Definite principle in psychotherapy. Unless you want to change, you're not going to. So to realize, first of all, that it's all you and that you can therefore change you. And to realize that you don't do it on the level of the problem itself. You have to do it from outside of that level. You have to see the situation more comprehensively. You have to be able to perceive what the situation is doing to you, how you are responding to it, and how you could possibly change those responses. To be aware of why you react this way, not necessarily an intellectual explanation, but just an emotional feeling. Okay? Because we can gain so much from our sensations if we just pay attention to them. All we got to do, focus our mental energy on the sensation. That's all. Don't try to change it. That allows you to become more aware of what's going on inside you because your attention is being drawn within. The more you think of the situation, the more the emotion is triggered. The more you pay attention to the emotion, the less you're thinking about the situation to trigger that emotion. And the more you're just going through the process of feeling the emotion. Gets too much, depending on what it is, do any one of those 3 breathing methods till it calms down. Get up and forget about it if you want to, or try it some more. You don't have to spend a long time doing this. Just anything that will allow your attention to be on you when the situation is happening rather than on the situation. Your attention will go back to the situation, especially if it needs tending to. But just be aware of who it is that's acting in that situation. That's not something we usually do. You know, in behavioral psychology, what do they talk about? Stimulus and response. Well, who's receiving the stimulus and who's responding? That seems to be the crucial thing in the whole equation that's being left out. And that shows how much we're just outer directed, not paying attention to what's going on within us. We're receiving that stimulus. Something is happening to us to cause the response. Let's look at that intermediary step for once and see what's going on there. How can that hurt? I think you'd find it doesn't. It helps.
Yeah, and it also makes me think about, like, when I was telling you how I felt earlier this week, and there was no stimulus. I was just feeling this particular way, and trying to make sense of that is a little bit, frustrating. But it's disorienting to be overwhelmed by feelings that seem to come from nowhere.
Yeah. If you're doing any kind of growth process, lots of times things will wake up inside, but they're not waking up in a way that can be appreciated consciously in the waking state. You don't know what's going on. I mean, all those unconscious things are there right now, and you're, perceiving and reacting and processing based on those. But we're not usually consciously aware of it. The more you expand your awareness, the more you become consciously aware. And one of the key ways of that happening is when something is happening inside, you become aware it's happening. It's not necessarily from any stimulus in the outside world. It's from a process that's going on within you. Depending on what's happening to you emotionally, there may have been some cue in the environment you didn't even pay attention to that triggered off something unconsciously, and you were able to appreciate that triggering. So that probably happens to everyone as well at some point. We're just not aware that this is what's going on. It seems to make no sense at all. I've gone through experiences where for weeks I felt a certain way, had no idea why I felt that way. And it was very strong and made no sense. And really, it made no sense. It was complete nonsense, totally irrational. But I think my mind was just trying to grasp something to come up with an explanation as to why I was feeling that way. But the explanation was not valid. I couldn't come up with anything that made any sense at all. So I just gave up and felt it. And within a few days, it was gone. While I was in it and allowed it to grow, it grew. While I just let it express itself, it dissipated and went away. And it seemed to me, almost no control consciously over it anyway. So why was I bothering to do all that stuff? It didn't do any good. That's not what was going on. It was coming from somewhere else inside. Based on a past experience, yeah, and I recognized that, but it still didn't do any good. It still had to exhaust itself because it was the feeling and the sensation that past experience generated. That's what I was dealing with, not the experience. That's in the past. It's gone. But to my mind, which is not necessarily in contact with everyday life, it hasn't gone. Those deeper aspects are still going on from childhood. Childhood is, well, for me anyway, a long ways away. But those things are still there. They don't go away because my life is different. Sometimes we would like to think that. And in many ways, in terms of conscious behavior, they do. But we still have these foundations that we've built our personality on. And if we become aware of those foundations, well, there's a lot we can do with that. We're no longer trapped by the experiences we had in the past. And that's how we can step outside of our ego functioning. And there's all these different, Freud talked about primary process functioning and so on, all these different levels of functioning. Although Freud is not very much in vogue in psychology these days, I think he had some valid points, as did Carl Jung. And these points are not according to the Western scientific method, so they're not highly regarded, that everything has to be, observed, replicated, measured, and so on, and come up with a hypothesis and the theory and test it and all these things. That works very well for the rational mind. It does not work for the intuitive mind. It does not work for these things that seem to be completely irrational. We can't define those and put those in boxes. We can't observe them and measure them, but they're there. And so as a result, although we can apply the scientific method to a lot of this, we really can't to a lot as well. And we have to address those things. And to address them, we can't apply the usual standards that we use in everyday life. We have to apply something that seems to not be the way to do it, which is, okay, I feel fear. Nature programmed me to run away from the fear stimulus, and you're telling me to stay with it. And if you're saying, oh, I just can't bear it anymore, I can't, then don't. That's not going to do any good. But to the extent that you can, see what you can do. And the more you open that door, the easier it gets. The more you keep the monster in the closet, the bigger he gets. The more you open the door and let him out, the smaller he becomes. And then you find out he wasn't a monster at all anyway. It was just you creating that. And if you created it, you can uncreate it. You can let it go.
Yeah, and that would seem to be the ultimate, process of transformation.
Yeah.
And with that being said, it's just an ever recycling process.
Yeah. I don't know if there's an end to it. I haven't seen one. And to expect an end means we're creating a goal, which is what I think a lot of people want. If they go to a counselor, I know a lot of counselors, and a lot of people that approach it first as if the counselor will cure them, which is just nonsense. The person themselves has to do the work. It's like, well, why isn't this counselor doing this for you? The counselor can't do it for you. You have to do it for you. The counselor guides you in the process, may set little goals as steps in that process so that you can get somewhere. It may make it easier for you if you have medication, for example, but the medication doesn't cure. The medication doesn't address the issues. You can do that if the symptoms are too much and the symptoms get dampened through medication, and then you can address it better. But it's the whole idea that in reality, we hold all of this within ourselves and we can do something about it. But if we try to handle it on a surface level, when it's coming from someplace that is not on the surface, it's not really going to work. We have to get to the level that it's functioning at and realize what it is. The awareness is what changes it. Just a counseling session, a good counselor should make you aware of what you're doing, what's going on. That, tackling a certain problem the way you've been doing it hasn't worked. There's another way of doing it. And there's the awareness. We can do it with ourselves too. Not that we shouldn't go to a counselor if we need to. But it's just that we don't tackle it with awareness. We tackle it with anxiety. We tackle it with a sense of desperation based on attachment to a particular situation. And we're swallowed up in that and cannot see beyond it. So our vision is just tunnel vision, and all we see is the particular situation in the terms of our own attachment, or that attachment being threatened. And the fear, the anger, the anxiety, depression, whatever it may be that results from that. And I think that depends upon what kind of physical and psychological makeup we have. That kind of more or less determines what we're predisposed to in terms of reacting to the situation, whether it's depression or whatever it might be.
I think we're so used to, Tom, I think we're accustomed to feeling as if we must have some professional that guides us through this process. Do you think there's any danger to a person really trying to manage this on their own?
If the symptoms are severe and they can't manage them that well, yeah, I would think it would be better to have someone oversee the process. If it's not that bad or even mild, then we could probably handle it ourselves. If we can get that insight, that's the thing that will change it. If the symptoms are really bad, then we're kind of lost at sea. Sitting down and breathing and becoming aware is just not going to help. Or if we're just going to pay attention to our symptoms, it might hurt. So we need to have someone oversee the process, whatever that may be, whatever that counselor may favor in terms of the therapy for that person. But it's not a situation of us being out of the picture and the counselor doing it. Even if you go into a counselor, you're still doing it. He's just helping you along and showing you what you can do, knowing your case and being, educated and skilled in the process. So should everyone do it? No, not if you're really having a real hard time. I think the symptoms should get easier to handle, easier to manage, then it's safer for you to do it. There are people that do it anyway. What can you say? We all have free will. We can do what we want. But it's probably not the best idea. The people that, manage extreme stress by alcohol and drugs and, or running to relationships or whatever it might be, that's just, addiction. And that addiction is more extreme attachment. You're just going to end up suffering. It's not going to work. Freedom doesn't lie there in whatever we're attached to. It could be a job. It could be anything. That's not going to be the way out.
Yeah.
We are the way out.
Wow. Well, once again, Tom, you've brought us through a really complex set of ideas around emotions and extreme emotions, and I hope people are resonate with what you're saying. I know that I have learned a great deal from you, and being able to manage loss and anger and rage and despair in my own life, and just being able to say that I can be with my emotions is quite an accomplishment. So thank you very much.
Yes, and it is an accomplishment. That's what we all have to do. Yeah.
And I appreciate you so much, and thanks for your wisdom, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Okay, me too. Let's
Thanks,
do
Tom.
it again.
Okay. Hi, Tom. I appreciate you coming back to continue our discussion. We had just finished up a nice and lengthy talk about extreme emotions and managing them. And this week in particular, as the podcast was in production and we were getting ready to put it out, so many events happened over the course of the week as we were working on this podcast and editing it that I really wanted to bring you back to try to help address some of the extreme emotions that people are feeling. I know I'm seeing it at the college campus, although I'm not on campus, certainly in my class meetings, in campus meetings, in faculty meetings and committee meetings over Zoom calls. It's on everyone's mind that there have been so many more acts of violence and traumatic events unfolding this week. I don't feel like it's different than many other weeks, but I think here as we are positioned in the middle of the Chauvin trial for the death of George Floyd, and to have another young black man shot and killed by the police 10 miles from this location is certainly reactivating a lot of traumatic wounds, both personally for individuals and collectively across the board. And that's just scratching the surface this week of the things that have happened. But that in particular, I think, is on everyone's mind, and it gives us a real concrete example of how we can manage our feelings in the midst of what I'm calling an ego storm or an emotional storm. I feel like not only myself am I in a personal storm, but we're just in this national storm right now, and despair and anger and outrage over this continued violence. And so I just wanted to bring you back to help me and others to sort of navigate those extreme reactions that are justified.
Are they justified? That, I think all kinds of extreme reactions, especially of a violent nature, many times, like most murders, are kind of spontaneous. They're based on our perception of what's going on in a kind of trigger reaction. Violence being obviously an extension, usually, of anger, of a need to defend yourself, or the perceived need to defend yourself, which is in turn, I think, based on fear. And when we are afraid and we allow the emotions to cloud our perception, we're going to act from emotion. If the emotion is strong, the action will be strong. And the action usually, or reaction, is usually disproportionate to the stimulus to that reaction. Okay, so there's something out there, you get afraid of it. Maybe you didn't have to be afraid of it, but you were. If the fear is huge, then you react in a huge way. Okay, and this produces more and more irrationality and more emotionality. When something like what the event that happened you were talking about, just not very far from the trial, a mimicked event from what caused the trial in the first place, then you have people responding to it in like manner. Okay, an emotional event occurs, it's charged up, and people will react emotionally. This will create more and more emotionality, more and more irrationality, and less clarity in terms of what's going on.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just have to pause for a minute because with a constant onslaught of violence against the black community, and particularly, young black men, but not solely. We have Breonna Taylor. We have just incident after incident. So I don't think that these responses are irrational. When you are under threat for your life and you're concerned about your children and your grandchildren, and these things continue to happen, and it seems like there's no end in sight. How is it that we are supposed to react? What do we do with that when it doesn't seem that anyone's voices or concerns are being heard on any level?
Well, I think, first of all, that it's important to realize that we're just all human. And we're going to react in a way that nature's programmed us to react. And that in that reaction, we have some measure of control. We're not exercising that control. The emotional climate in the United States for the past few years has become more and more emotional and less rational. And when you're talking about specifically actions and violent actions against the black community, you're talking about bigotry that's essentially systemic. It's kind of built in here with some people. The less rational they are, the more bigoted you will be. The more you don't see things clearly, the more you're going to go with these emotions, which are essentially points of view in terms of bigotry that have been inherited down the line, unless you've had some bad experience, which you then generalize to the entire community, which of course is ridiculous because you can't do that. But that's what people do. And that is based again on that fear reaction. Anything that triggers something that's similar to an earlier experience that was unpleasant will trigger that same reaction, whether it's the same thing or not. And that's the problem. And when we go with these natural instinctive reactions and place them where it's not appropriate to place them, when we're under threat physically for our lives, they're appropriate. Most of the time we're not, but we still have the reaction because we've misplaced the psychological and the emotional with the physical, because these physical reactions are so strong. Fear is so strong. And fear, I think, is the basis of all of this. You know, any kind of, I believe, bigoted reaction is based basically on fear, whether you heard about it and believed it or experienced it yourself. And then you draw a false conclusion based on the false premise that everybody in this particular group is this way, when it doesn't take much of anything to realize that we're all different. Everybody, our external manifestations change completely. We're all individualized, and we're all different in terms of our psychology and our emotions and our background and our genetics and so on. We can't possibly all be the same because we belong to a certain racial group or ethnic group or religious group or gender or sexual orientation or whatever it may be. It just doesn't happen. And the thing that amazes me is we justify these actions. The more we're stuck in this perception, the more we're not going to get anywhere, because we're obviously not looking at the situation clearly. The people that do these things are fearful, and they react in anger based on that fear. And I don't think anything good ever comes of that in any situation, no matter who's involved. We're not using the mind that we're given.
Certainly when we are talking about this on one side of the equation with, where bigotry comes from and how those, acts play out based on irrational generalizations, those are valid points. On the other side of this equation, I feel that a community or just a collective body of individuals are really living under threat and feeling that constant anxiety and fear by the very nature of living in their skin. And that's a really hard level of fear to sustain when you turn on the TV and every week you see that it kind of amps up that fear that I'm not sure that I can drive to work. I'm not sure I can go walk to the store and back. And so that's something entirely different. Can you help us, to manage, to look at those emotions?
Well, first of all, it's kind of like a partnership. The reason the emotions are there is because they're reactions to other people's emotions. There's this essentially bigoted act that is generalized to everyone, and this has been going on for hundreds of years. And that's what I mean, like it's kind of infected our society. It's based on something that is manifestly not true, and it's based on, therefore, irrationality. So the best we can do is, without changing the actual source of the bigotry, is cope with what's happening. And if we cope with what's happening on an emotional level, it's going to be tough. If we allow the fear to overcome us as a reaction to someone else's fear and therefore violent actions, it's going to make life much more miserable for everyone involved. So the thing that I think needs to happen is more clarity of perception, which would come with more awareness of the situation. Okay, a black person with some justification could say, white people are terrible. I don't trust a white person. Of course, that's just as bigoted a reaction as a white person saying, I don't trust black people. There's more that's been done historically unjustly, and I think really the United States should, as a country, should be ashamed of how it's treated black people and should continue to be ashamed about it. But if that dawned on any community of white people that are bigoted, then I think that would help to change the situation. More awareness. A black person, what do you do when you're victimized? Okay, how do you react to that? What do you do with that? Well, I think the first thing, and I'm not saying this is easy or there's a simple solution or anything of that nature, because that's obviously not true. Otherwise, we would have solved it instead of going seemingly backwards into more violence, more irrationality, and more bigotry. Obviously, that's not the way to go at all. Why are we doing this? And I think we're doing it because we perceive a separation between us and someone else. The other, the alien is there. They're not part of our community because they don't have the same religion. They don't have the same customs. They don't have the same skin color, et cetera, et cetera. What we do is we divide people up constantly. And as a result, the unifying factor that's actually there, which is we're all people. Can't we just open our eyes and see that? And if there's diversity, why don't we celebrate the diversity and get into all the great different types of culture and different types of whatever, fill in the blank, all the diversity that's there.
I know, Tom. I know that seems like, it seems like, it's not rocket science, but that's not
Right.
reality. And it's not
Right.
what's happening.
Right.
Sure, we can all agree that's what should happen, but it doesn't happen.
Right, exactly. And it doesn't happen because we're not looking at the unifying factor. We're creating differences, whether there are differences there or not. We're making it, instead of the diversity that's obviously within all of creation, we're demonizing the diversity. That's us doing that. Okay, and the more we continue to divide, the more we continue to separate, and the more we will continue to have problems.
Well, I think as I look at this in conversations that are happening all around, oftentimes it's the blatant issues that are in our faces are a little bit easier to point to. That's discrimination, that's racism, that's victimization. And then there are these more subtle layers that come through where it's like people are sort of blind to their blindness.
Oh, yeah.
They're unaware of the blindness and the way that systemic racism, functions, and that we're all contributing and we're complicit in that. And it's hard to look at that. It's hard to admit it. It's hard to be honest with yourself. It's really tough. Those are tough conversations to have.
Yeah.
But so my question for you is, when individuals are faced with that kind of victimization where there is no recompense, right? There is no one that's really addressing it. They can't hear you. They can't see you. It's almost like you're screaming into the wind and no one is listening, what to do with that level of despair and that level of silence and that level of frustration. I find myself just heartsick watching it all unfold. And I know many people who can't escape, the reality of it in their daily lives. It must just be overwhelming and devastating to be living in this kind of pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if you're feeling that, any kind of emotion that is the result of some unjust behavior, some ignorant behavior, then the thing is to feel the emotion because you're feeling it. When you allow it to express itself, its power diminishes. To see the situation more clearly, you need to kind of throw out some of the screen of emotion that's in the way of a clear perception of the situation. So the emotion's there. There's no denying it, and you shouldn't deny it. You don't let unjust things just occur. And You don't just allow these things to happen because, well, that's how it is. You have to stand up and say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, and it's quite obviously wrong. So if we address the issue with less emotion, with more clarity, it would be a step in the right direction. Is that going to cure anything? I don't know that. It's just that we haven't done it. When we have done it to any great extent, it seems to have done more good than bad. It's really at the core of the whole thing is when you're victimized or subject to something, a violent act, which I've been, and most people have been. If we stay with the emotion, it's just going to cloud our judgment and cloud our perceptions from there on in. If we don't, we get more clarity. What is the final solution? Obviously, the final solution is let's treat everybody equally. Let's not be so stupid as to react to people based on surface things. If we look at what's deeper inside, we'll find not only commonality, but interconnectedness, and even deeper than that, real unity. That's what we're actually after. But we get bamboozled by the diversity and decide to make value judgments on that diversity, when all it is an expression of unity. So why don't we get back to the unity? And the obvious thing here is we're all the same. The victim and the person that was victimizing, they're both people. Let's get back to that. We hold on to the emotions. When we hold on to the emotions, we hold on to the irrationality and the separation. Can you blame people for having the emotions? No, absolutely not. Can you blame someone for being terrified if this is what's going on with their racial group? No, of course not. If they're feeling it, then feel it. But what do we do then? Do we act out of those emotions? Well, that's what caused the problem in the first place. And that's what will exacerbate the problem in the future. Will it happen? Of course it will. We're only people. We're only human. But if we can just step beyond these attachments to these value judgments, which are based on fiction, absolute fiction.
Well, looking at those emotions again, I kind of want to come back to, I think we're kind of living in a parallel micro, macro traumatic situation where, like one feeds the other. As you're saying, you have these experiences, they may be, let's say they're unpleasant, and then you take those unpleasant experiences and you generalize and justify bigotry or discrimination or whatever categorization you're using to try to protect yourself from those experiences, more of those experiences, or the feeling of powerlessness or whatever it happens to be. But then on the other side of that, we have trying to move through an experience in the world that re-traumatizes us every single day or every week with another incident that reminds us of these wounds that we have and that these traumas that we've encountered. And those are very real things. It's not as if we are reacting out of a trauma that we don't remember. It's reactivated weekly. And I think individuals are exhausted, tired, fatigued of living on this sort of emotional roller coaster and this like traumatic wheel that just keeps going around and around again and passing over those traumas, reactivating them constantly.
The only thing I see that will solve it is more awareness of what the heck we're doing to ourselves. Why are we doing this pointless judgment, pointless discrimination and separation? It only results in suffering. It only results in victimization, and it doesn't help anything at all. We have to step back away from this tunnel vision of perception that's there in society and widen that lens and see it in a bigger way. And what I mean by that is simply be aware of what we're doing and take a look at the bigger picture. Our emotions are boxing us in. they're reinforcing the tunnel vision. It's the two things together. If the emotions weren't there, it'd be a heck of a lot easier. But the tunnel vision shouldn't be there either. And it's based on this, let's put things in categories. And this is pleasant and unpleasant, and that means it equals good and bad. And let's generalize all a whole bunch of a chain of false ideas and false perceptions. You know, start with a false premise, you end up with a false conclusion. But you got to see the premise. You got to see where it's coming from within you first. You can't do that without stepping outside of that point of view. That's not an easy thing to do. If you're locked in, you will justify to no end actions that are completely ridiculous or terrible. You will keep doing that.
Yeah. I want to come back to, you said, it caught my attention. You said that kind of, what did you say? Automatic chain reaction. And I want to tie that to that, and when you get caught in that ego storm, that automatic chain reaction in your, I don't even know where it's located, Thom. It doesn't feel like it's in my brain. It feels like it's in my, in my core. You said the word. It's really just overwhelming to get locked in to that swirling. And can you help us when we're feeling that to, what are some steps we can take? I know you're going to work with breath, but I have to tell you, it's so overpowering to be a victim to your own thoughts and emotions. Yes.
That's what we are. We're creating it and not even aware that that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We're making it happen for ourselves, and we don't even know we're making it happen. Why? Because it's based on that natural programming that nature's put into us to survive. If it's based on fear, it just goes by itself. It's an unconscious process. We don't decide to feel fear. We don't decide to generalize that fear even into places where it doesn't belong. It happens automatically based on nature's programming, so we will preserve the body and keep on living. A basic thing that's there for everyone and every living thing. We have to deal with the feeling. It's irrational, these conclusions. So thinking about it and justifying it will do no good whatsoever, because it's obvious this is crazy and this isn't working, and all it does is cause suffering. So we have to go with that feeling that's inside of us, to feel it, to recognize it. If it gets overwhelming, cut through the feeling. Well, if the feeling is based on fear, fear causes tension in the body. So what do? How do you calm down when you're all tense? If you're pacing back and forth and you can't relax, how do you calm down? You exhaust the tension. You exhaust that energy that's caused the tension in the body. You can even tense your whole body. If you take a deep breath and just tense the whole body and hold it as long as you can, blow the breath out and relax the whole body all at once, and do that over and over again, you will exhaust the tension. So you can use your tension to get rid of tension. Mm. And then if you need to pace or well, let pace, but feel. Don't get into that round of thought. If the thoughts come in, which they will, go back to the sensations. Place your attention on the sensation. Place the attention on the running or walking or tensing the body. Put your attention there. Okay, every time the thought comes in, which it will, go back to the sensations in the body. Go back to the procedure that you're following that cuts through that fear, that cuts through that anger, because anger will just create huge amounts of tension as well. Mm-hmm. You address the physiology of what's happening. That will calm it down. When you get caught up in the chain of thoughts that created that tension, you will just create more tension. Mm-hmm. That's not going to do anyone any good. Mm-hmm. If you make decisions based on that tension, based on that fear or any kind of emotion, you're probably going to end up in a worse situation. That's what we see people doing. And that's why that awareness of what you're doing changes it. And you can get more awareness by doing what I just said. You're paying attention to the body. You feel what's going on in the body. Release it. Let it go. It's not doing you any good. The people that are angry against other people are hurting themselves more than they're hurting the other people. They bear that anger with them all the time. It does you no good at all. Release it. Let it go. And another breathing thing you can do if there's a lot of anger, which helps, is to inhale through your mouth and exhale through your nose. And if you narrow your lips so you make a sound as you inhale, it cools the air, send it right up to the brain, and exhale through the nose. And do that a few times. If there's a lot of anger, then do the other breathing to calm down more. But first address the body. First address all that tension that's going on. Whenever those thoughts come in that cause the fear or the anger, simply address your physiology. Calm it down. You will see what's going on better with yourself, because that's the actual issue here. It's your reaction to whatever situation is going on that's causing your experience of that situation. It's not the situation itself. And although that may sound crazy to some people, the more you try this out, the more you'll see that's the case. We are creating how we're feeling all the time. And we are not our feelings. We are not our thoughts. We're not our attitudes and perspectives and perceptions and points of view. Those are things we do. They're not who we are. And if we would just address what we do from a deeper perspective, closer to who we are, we would get more awareness. We would stop a lot of these stupid reactions. There's no other word for it but stupid. And we're all stupid to some extent. We all do these things based on limited awareness and natural programming, and we take that natural programming and impose it on places where it doesn't belong. And we perpetuate this illusion and live by the illusion and pretend it's true. It's not. And I know that all of that is easier said than done, and I'm not saying there's this panacea here that will solve all our problems and it'll happen overnight, because it won't. And if I'm not a member of the group that's being victimized, I don't really know what they're going through. I can't pretend that. But I do think we're all human, and we all have a human body and a human nervous system, and we all breathe. And we can use these to at least help, to whatever extent we can, to calm that situation down within ourselves, which will then calm the situation down within society. Will everyone do this? Of course not. So we simply will still have to deal with short-sighted and ignorant behavior. We're all ignorant to one extent or another. Let's make ourselves less ignorant as best we can over a period of time. There's no simple solution here in the long run. You adopt these things, it's not going to suddenly change everything. If everyone in the country did this, it's not going to change everything overnight. Our programming is there, God knows, for some of these people, probably since childhood. It was programmed into me in childhood, not by my family. My parents weren't like that, but by others around me. And you can overcome it. All you have to do is be like a little kid, be innocent, be open, look at what's really there. How is this person? Well, actually, he's fine. Why am I acting this way? And then you will hear, well, that one is good, but this whole group isn't, which is just absurd. Holding on to this inaccurate point of view. And I think the most effective way to cut through it is to address our physiology and then become more aware of what it is we're really doing here. How are we helping ourselves? How are we helping others?
Okay. Well, that helps a lot, and I really appreciate you coming back. I wanted to, add some strategies that people can take away right now as we're all, just reeling with week after week of, one more violent act. So I appreciate you coming back and working this out with me, and I look forward to continuing our discussion.
Sure, absolutely. I'm glad to do it.
Thank you, Thom.
Thank you.
I feel so fortunate to have such a wonderful teacher and friend in Thom Carr, and to share his wisdom with all of you. If you would like to know more about Thom and his work, you can email him at thomyoga@comcast.net. That's THOMYOGA at Comcast.net. You have been listening to InterSpace with Angelina Avedano. My heartfelt gratitude and appreciation goes to my husband, David Needs, Senior Production Engineer. If you would like to learn more about me or my work, look for me on Facebook and Instagram, Dr. A. Avedano with Cicada Personal Metamorphosis. That's Cicada with a Y, CYCADA. Or you can email me at dr.aavedano@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This is Angelina reminding you that we're all connected.